The Russian President Vladimir Putin said this morning that Moscow is ready to look for diplomatic solutions amid raging tensions with the West over Ukraine. But he has stressed that the interests of Russia and the security of its citizens were non-negotiable. Now, yesterday, U.S. President Joe Biden announced a new package of sanctions against Russia. He described Moscow's recognition of separatist regions in the eastern Ukraine as the beginning of a Russian invasion. Joining us now to take this discussion forward and give us the latest on the developments there is Washington Post Moscow Bureau Chief Robyn Dixon. Robyn, good morning to you. Thank you very much for your time. What's been Russia's response to the latest rounds of economic sanctions imposed by both Europe and the United States?
Well, I think at the moment what we're looking at is the greatest crisis that we've seen in NATO and Russia relations since the end of the Cold War. Russian President Vladimir Putin has talked about a diplomatic solution here, but what he is really seeking in conditions that he laid out very clearly yesterday was Ukraine's capitulation and it giving up any effort or aim to join NATO, and also that it must give up any weapons and accept Crimea as part of Russia. So those are conditions that for Ukraine are non-starters, which sets the scene, unfortunately, for conflict.
And let's talk about Crimea, because I'm glad you raise it in your response. Observers will say that sanctions against Russia will not achieve anything if we look back at the invasion and subsequent annexing of Crimea back in 2014 by Russia. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that it is fair to say that sanctions have not changed Russia's behaviour, and it's very difficult to achieve that through sanctions. But at the same time, the West and other countries are looking forward and looking at ways to prevent what could be a catastrophic war and a catastrophic invasion. And we've already seen from Europe some pretty tough sanctions yesterday in an effort to bring some kind of solution and to deter Russia from invading. And I think the most striking of those was the response from Germany yesterday to put an end to the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. It's an 11 billion gas pipeline from Russia to Germany on the basis of this decision to recognise two separatist regions of Ukraine.
At the heart of this, Robyn, is, and I'm relying on reports that we have been reading, it's got to do with President Putin's fear of Ukraine joining NATO. Why is that seen as a threat in the eyes of the Kremlin?
I think that this is about more than one thing for Vladimir Putin. He is seeking to remake Europe's security architecture and to push back NATO forces and NATO equipment from Eastern Europe and from the Baltic states. Countries that joined, the 14 countries that joined, in fact, queued up to join NATO in the late 90s and continued to join. So Putin has long been very upset about that. It happened at a time when Russia was weak. Now he has rebuilt Russia as a very strong global power with hypersonic missiles, and he believes the time has come to renegotiate this trend. And Ukraine is the flashpoint in this particular crisis because of its desire to join NATO and the fact that it neighbours Russia.
Yeah, let's talk about Russia's allies. Who are they and what have they been saying?
I guess the closest ally, the closest military ally that we're seeing is Belarus. It's the President Alexander Lukashenko. He has hosted massive military exercises in Belarus of late, including S-400 missiles that are close to Ukraine's border. These were expected to go home to their bases on Sunday, and we almost immediately had announcements that actually that was not going to happen, and those weapons remain in and forces remain in Belarus, and these are Russian forces and Belarusian forces remain in Belarus, threatening Ukraine.
All right, and let's look further then and talk about Russia being part of the BRICS formation, and you will know that South Africa is very much part of that. Yesterday, I spoke to our own Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, and I was looking for a position from our country as to the stance of Russia against Ukraine. And it's fair to say that they didn't really they've not taken a position. Does that surprise you?
It does surprise me. I think one of the speeches after the angry and rambling address that we saw from Vladimir Putin on Monday, in which he accused Ukraine of genocide without offering any evidence and actually concocted those claims, and announced that he was recognizing these two regions in Ukraine. The most powerful speech of the day, I think, came from Kenya's ambassador to the UN, Mr. Martin Kimani, who spoke to the Security Council and gave a very stirring address about the choices that African nations made after colonialism. When they were becoming independent, they had to decide what borders they would choose. And he said, we accepted colonial borders even though we didn't like them, because we didn't want to be engaged in years of war. We wanted to move forward to peaceful solutions and not look back with what he called dangerous nostalgia. And his speech actually went viral. Millions of people have looked at that speech, and I think that was a very powerful statement about sovereignty of nations and about moving forward peacefully.
Yeah, very interesting thoughts indeed. As we wrap it up, let's talk about the global consequences of a full-scale war between Russia and Ukraine in what is an interconnected world. What will the consequences be?
I think the consequences would be devastating, and they would reach far beyond those two countries. Apart from the impact of sanctions on Russia and the global economy, apart from the fact that Ukraine is a very large producer of grain and feeds countries across the world, including many countries in Africa, I think we would be looking at Cold War Mark II. Relations between the West and NATO would become paralysed, frozen, and even worse than they are at the moment. And we are a global community looking to solve some very complex problems, including things like climate change and global warming. If our international bodies are choked and paralysed with tension and military confrontation, our chances of resolving those crises, I think, will be diminished. And that, to me, is the most worrying thing of all. Yeah.
Robyn, let's wrap it up. And earlier, when we opened this conversation, I spoke about the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, saying that he is ready for, quote-unquote, diplomatic solutions. And this on the back of the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who cancelled his meeting with the foreign minister of Russia. Is there still room for diplomatic talk?
I think the room for diplomatic movement is closing, unfortunately. People keep talking about it, but I think there have been many efforts made in the last few weeks. There have been many meetings held, and we have seen Vladimir Putin accepting the independence of these two separatist regions and preparing to send in the military. And when you get to that stage, I think diplomatic windows begin to close. They say they'll keep on talking, and let's hope that they do.
Washington Post bureau chief in Moscow. That's Robyn Dixon. Thank you very much for your insights on this developing story.